Hey everyone, welcome back. It's finally here, my mage tips and ranking guide for Ulduar. A couple quick things on this video first. First is that it is not a boss guide. This guide assumes you already know the basics of Encounter and have a general idea of what to do from having watched a boss guide or a stream or something beforehand, so just note that. The second is just know that the format will go something like this. First I'll cover general progression tips and spec specific progression tips, and then after that I'll go into ranking tips for that boss, and finally spec specific ranking tips, so i.e. ranking as Arcane and ranking as Fire. No, I'm not covering Frost. And then lastly, as always, if you like the video, please like and subscribe. That really helps out the channel. And what helps out even more is also dropping a follow at twitch.tv/Crateria and tuning in for a live stream. I really love and appreciate all of you that come out to the streams to support me there. That really means a lot, so thank you. And as long as I'm not focusing on ranking or speedruns, it's usually a good time to ask me questions too. And you can just add me a bunch in the chat. I'm not going to be offended by that in case I missed the question, because a lot of times I do. I'm bad at reading chat sometimes. So don't feel bad if you have to do that. But it can be a great time to ask me questions just live right there and get the answers you need. And then finally join my Discord at discord.gg/Crateria if you want to join in on mage discussions. And with that, let's get on to the video. Thanks everyone. There's no ranking on Flame Leviathan, but a couple tips are that you should cast Fireward as you're being tossed up, and I also recommend Arcane Spec here for the burst with the turrets. 25 man, you'll alternate being shot up, so you'll have cooldowns every time you're sent up, which makes Arcane Mages great for bursting down turrets, and you don't need to worry about mana either, so spam Arcane Blast. Alright, so Ignis is pretty easy, so my tips here focus on ranking. First thing is that damage to the adds doesn't count, so just focus on the boss. And then this next tip actually simplifies ranking for this boss quite a bit, because there's a ledge in the water, as you can see here, that you can swim underneath so that when Ignis casts Flame Jets, you don't get knocked up into the air since you hit your head on the ledge. Thus, for ranking, this makes things pretty easy. So for Arcane, you will want to be IA Spec and precast Slowfall on yourself, precast Fireward, and then pre-pot and precast on the boss, and as the boss is pulled into position, use Rocket Boots with Palm and Mirror Image to not lose uptime, and then hop at the last second of Rocket Boots from land to the water spot, and Slowfall should help get you there so that you don't need to swim. I totally botched this pull, so don't do what I did here, but that's ideally how I think it should be done. Then from here, it's pretty much a tank and spank, but as IA Spec, you want to finish the last cast you can before Flame Jets goes off, and then cast Fireward to give you a good IA proc and hopefully some good Frost Warding procs too. And then you just continue blasting. Easy. Also note, Flame Jets happens faster than your Fireward cooldown, so you won't be able to Fireward every Flame Jets. For Fire, the only difference is that instead of Fire Warding the Flame Jets, just use an instant cast right before you cast Flame Jets, so hopefully a Hot Streak proc or a Living Bomb refresh, and if not that, then just Fire Blast and then go back to blasting. Also for Fire, I don't recommend multi-dotting the adds with Living Bomb, as the top Fire rankings don't utilize that strat. Granted, this is because in their raids, the adds aren't tanked close enough for the Living Bomb explosion to hit the boss, but that could be the case for you too. And even if the adds are close enough for the Living Bomb explosion to hit them, you still have to hope for a Hot Streak proc from the Living Bomb explosion for that strat to work. And it can work, but if it backfires, like you don't get Hot Streak procs from the Living Bomb explosion, it's not critting, then you're out of good parse, and it's just not necessary to get a top rank either. And I view it just as more of a gamble than it's worth. It could be worth during the knockup if you're not using the ledge strat, but you should just be using the ledge strat, so it's, you know, whatever. But either way, we'll see how the ranking strats evolve over the phase, and I could be wrong, so check back and check my pinned comment in case this does change. Lastly, there isn't any reason you shouldn't be able to use this ledge strat, as every raid should be tanking Ignis near the water. But if for some reason you know your guild you're not able to use the ledge strat, I don't know why, but let's just say they can't, then the only difference is that as Arcane, you still cast Fireward right before the Flame Jets goes off and knocks you up, but then you blink down as soon as it knocks you up. And then for Fire, you would use instant cast in the air instead of blinking down, unless you don't have any instant cast available, like a Hot Streak procs to use or Living Bomb refresh, in which case you would just blink after the knockup. Razorscale is another easy fight, so these are all ranking tips. Only damage to Razorscale matters for ranking, so ensure all cooldowns and trinkets are up before she comes down, and if you're Arcane, make sure you have full mana. For Arcane, you want to be IA Spec, and you should cast Mirror Images now that they're fixed beforehand, and Fire Ward before she comes down. Have her targeted and be ready to cast as soon as you can, and also be close enough so that your sapper hits when you pop all cooldowns. When Razorscale reaches 50%, she does a knockaway, but this can be mitigated with a Hand of Protection from a pally, so call for a hop 5 seconds before she hits 50%, so that way you can keep blasting. If you can't get a hop, then blink as soon as it hits. Also, as Arcane IA, you can try and use a flame patch on the ground right as she's coming down to proc your Incanter's absorption. Just make sure that you utilize Palm properly so that you don't lose any casting time on the boss by having to move out of the fire. The advantage to doing this is is that if you get lucky with multiple Frost Warning procs, then you can stack up a large Incanter's Absorption proc by doing so. Lastly, I haven't done it yet, but I've also heard that you can stack up, put your back against one of the turrets so that when the knockback happens, you actually don't get knocked up into the air. Then you're gonna also probably, she's gonna be facing you so that, you know, you could get flame breath, so the tank's gonna have to turn it away. So, you know, your raid could stack there to all not get knocked away from what I understand with that strat, and then the tank just has to turn her before she does the flame breath. But we haven't done that ourselves, and I don't have a clip available for that, so just know that that's another strat you probably could wield, and just check for a clip of it somewhere, and if I find one, I'll put it in the pinned comment at a future date. For XT hard mode, if you're progressing, now that it's nerfed, I prefer Fire for its mobility and its extra cleaving on the life sparks. And so if you're progressing and don't need to provide Arcane's 3% damage buff, then I definitely recommend going Fire. For the life spark debuffs on you, blink out of the raid to prevent as much damage to the raid as possible, and then run back to the raid after the life spark spawns using instant cast as you do. And for gravity bombs, do the opposite. Run out of the raid while using instant cast to the correct direction that your raid leader has assigned, and then once the gravity bomb explodes, blink back into the raid. There isn't much else for progression tips other than helping your healers out by being ready to Hellstone if needed, as well as Ice Block if you're low during a Life Spark or Gravity Bomb, or even full block Tantrum if they're really struggling to heal. And you can also Ice Block the Gravity Bomb and mitigate the damage from it, but do not Ice Block in the raid or it will drop the Void Zone in the raid and still suck everyone in as well. For ranking, all add damage counts towards a parse, but ideally for ranking you wouldn't be on life spark duty, but if you are, just make sure you don't perform a cast that won't land before the spark dies. Also use instant cast as you're running out of the raid and also back into the raid, you know, just as always, make sure you're doing something while you're having to move. And as fire spec, you can living bomb the sparks during that movement if you don't have another instant cast available, but otherwise I don't recommend putting living bomb on the sparks, and the reason for that is that they die too quickly for it to be worth. In our raid they would die before even a third tick of living bomb would go off, so I don't recommend dotting them up. However, if you're in your raid for whatever reason the sparks are not dying so that you could get a full 12-second living bomb on them and then the living bomb is going to explode, then yeah, it would be worth, but I just don't see that being the case, especially in the later on in the phase. And then for Arcane, you want to be IA spec to use CDs and a Sapper at the start, but that's pretty much it because it's for the most part tank and spank with some movement. For Iron Council progression, I recommend Arcane, as this fight is all about Phase 3 damage, and thus you'll want to ensure all of your cooldowns and even trinkets are available come Phase 3. What this means is that you should use Icy Veins right at the start of the fight to ensure it's back up for Phase 3. If you wait to use Icy Veins until the first Rune of Power, then it might not be back up in time. Use your other cooldowns once the first Rune of Power spawns, but then save everything until Phase 3. During progression, I would even stop attacking once Rune Master was sub 30% if my trinkets were off cooldown, just to ensure that they wouldn't proc, and thus they'd be ready for Phase 3. You should also put Rune Master on focus at the start and have a focus spell steal macro ready to spell steal the shield he puts up. The shield that you can steal is a 50k shield, and if it's destroyed from taking damage, then you get a 50% damage buff for 15 seconds. During Phase 1, not even Overload will do enough damage to destroy the shield, but during Phase 2, you can spell steal it and break it with the Rune of Death that Rune Master puts down, thus getting you the damage buff. However, once Rune Master starts getting low, then you want to save the shield until Phase 3. So what I would do once Rune Master was sub 40ish% is I would stop attacking to save my trinkets, wait until he casts another shield, spell steal it, then evocate up to full mana, and then weaken the shield with a Rune of Death. You can track the shield's current amount with the Nan Wrath of the Lich King shield weak aura, which you can find a link to in the description, and I highly recommend it. Ideally, you want the shield down to about 10k right when Phase 3 starts, and then the AoE damage in Phase 3 should tick it down and proc the 15% damage buff. Ideally, you cast a Fire Ward a little bit before Rune Master casts his final Rune of Power, and then as he's casting it, pop Mirror Images and get in position for the Rune of Power. Arcane Blast him until he's dead, then swap to Steelbreaker and pop all cooldowns and a Sapper to trigger your Incanter's Absorption and let loose. If everything lines up right and the shield breaks with your CDs, then you'll have full CDs pumping with 1 second Arcane Blast and 2 separate 50% damage buffs on you. And with all of that, you can end up doing 24k DPS for Phase 3, which really helps carry the raid. So this is my strat that I recommend if you're doing progression, or if you're still, you know, struggling to meet that DPS check in your guild. For ranking on Iron Council, I'll assume you already know everything I covered in the progression section, and here you need to blast the entire time, and with kill times already getting down to 150 seconds, you'll need to adjust your cooldowns accordingly to your kill time, so keep that in mind. I.e. you may need to save Icy Veins until Phase 3, because even using it on the pole may not get it off cooldown before Phase 3 or even the end of the fight. Also in Phase 3, make sure to stand at the edge of the rune closest to Stormcaller, so that when a second Rune of Power is dropped, it may overlap the first, and then you get a couple casts off while standing in both Rune of Powers. And you'll also need to be aggressive with spell steals and getting them popped in Rune of Death in Phase 2 while also not not losing damage to movement. So just save your instant cast for that. And yeah. For ranking as Arcane, you'll still want to line CDs up with Phase 3, but you don't stop blasting in Phase 2. And ideally, you can get Innervate so you don't have to evocate at all. And if your guild kills Steelbreaker before the first tank dies, then you can probably spam Arcane Blast during CDs in Phase 3 and be fine on mana. But that's a pretty quick kill, so you might not be quite there yet with your guild. For Fire, the one thing to talk about is multi-dotting of all 3 bosses with Living Bomb. For ranking purposes, damage only counts towards the boss that you killed during that phase, meaning cleave damage doesn't ever count. Currently, the top 2 Fire rankings each do it differently. One ranking multi-dots all 3 bosses with Living Bomb the entire fight, which is essentially using a GCD for the explosion damage from Living Bomb and a chance at more hot streak procs. And the other ranking sticks strictly to single target. And if the player in that ranking didn't accidentally send a hot streak proc into Rune Master in Phase 1, then the rankings would essentially be tied on DPS. Thus, I think either strat is viable for ranking as Fire. However, I think the ideal strat is a hybrid of the two, where if you have to move during Phase 1 or 2 and you don't have a hot streak proc to use, then you Living Bomb the other bosses during that movement. However, again, we'll see how the ranking strats evolve over the phase, and I could be wrong, so check back and check my pinned comment in case this changes. Kologarn is another easy fight, so this is just for ranking. The Rubble ads don't count for your ranking, but the arms do as long as they die before Kologarn does. And thus you want to make sure that you kill the arms before killing Kologarn. If you're Arcane, use Encounter's Absorption Spec and precast Fire Ward before the fight, and then pre-pot and precast with your guild's pull timer, and then rocket boots in so that your sapper is in range to hit the arms and body, and then while you're rocket booting in, cast Mirror Image and Palm, and then blast your CDs and focus Kologarn until people are squeezed, in which case you'll then kill the arm on the left, which is named right arm, to free them, and then you go back to Kologarn. For Fire ranking, do the same opener except prioritize Living Bombing both Kologarn and his arms for multi-dotting and cleave, and then do the fight the same with focusing Kologarn and only DPSing the arm on your left if people are squeezed, but keep Living Bomb up on arms at all times. If an arm dies and the rubble is tanked within range of the boss, then you can Living Bomb them for the explosion cleave and the hot streak procs from it, but I recommend ignoring them in case they're tanked too far away for the Living Bomb explosion to hit, and ideally this just doesn't happen. Auriaya is another easy fight, so again, just ranking tips here. A few things to note for both Arcane and Fire specs is that all damage counts except for the Swarming Guardians that she spawns in the middle of the fight, so just ignore the cats that she summons, let Cleave take them down, and take care with your pre-pot timing depending on how your guild pulls the boss, so just take note of that however you guys do your pull. For mirror images, you have 2 choices. You can either precast them at the start of the fight to not worry about threat and get some free damage as you don't have to use a GCD in the middle of the fight to cast them then, or you can save them for the Feral Defender, with the idea being that this should hopefully reduce the chance that the Feral Defender will pounce on you while your mirror images are up. So like last week, the Feral Defender fucked up my Arcane parse hard through multiple pounces and locking me out of my Arcane school. So I'm going to try mirror images once it spawns, but if that doesn't work, then I'll update the pinned comment here. So it's your call. Check my pinned comment to see if it did work for me. I'm hoping it works because it's just really annoying and it can screw your parse. And lastly, you can ice block her fear as well as human and undead racial it. But for ranking purposes, I would also have a shaman in your group for Tremor Totem in case your priest missed with Massive Spell, and hopefully you can kill her before the 3rd fear. So as Arcane, precast Flame Strike rank 9 and then rank 8 as the cats come in, and then pop all CDs and blizzard the cats down until the first is about to die, then sapper and switch to single target on Auriaya. If you don't have Ice Shards talent, then you could spam Arcane Explosion instead of Blizzard, but I recommend Ice Shards talent with Blizzard for ranking purposes on this fight. Currently a top parse is just IA spec and focuses the boss, but I don't think that's optimal, and I think it's mainly a top parse due to the speed of the kill, because they killed it a lot faster than most kills, and they had minimal downtime from her fear, and no defender interrupts, so like from the Feral Defender. So the AoE at the start should be more DPS than single target if done right, but as soon as the first cat is about to die, single target focus Auriaya and pray that the Feral Defender doesn't pounce on you, which is again why I'll be trying mirror images once it spawns. As Fire, I recommend having Firestarter here and Minor Glyph Blast Wave for this fight so that you don't knock back the cats at the start. I also think FFB has the edge over Fire Torment the Weak due to it having Blizzard, but either spec can rank well. As the pull is happening, precast Flame Strike rank 9 and rank 8, so the ground dots are already there as the cats come in. As they come in, only cast Living Bomb on them if they'll live long enough to explode before dying, and then cast Living Bomb on Auriaya as well. If they're going to die before, like your guild has really strong AoE, then just cast Living Bomb on Auriaya as they're coming in. Then you want to pop CDs, use Firestarter, Sapper, and if you're FFB, Blizzard them until they're dead. If your Living Bombs explode and you get Hot Streak procs, then stop your Blizzard cast, send those into Auriaya, and once those are dead, it's again mostly a tank and spank, but cast Living Bomb on the Defender once it spawns is another thing you can do as Fire. Alright, Hodir, this is our fight. We are the DPS. This is the mage's fight, and you're going to win, because I don't know what I'm going to do if you don't. Alright, with that preface, for progression, I highly recommend Fire for this fight, and specifically FFB, as Frostfire Bolt benefits more from Storm Power over other abilities, resulting in about 20% more damage over TTW spec with all other things being equal. And I also recommend using the Hodir Weak Aura linked in the description for tracking the buffs associated with the fight. And I also recommend the Mirror Image Weak Aura posted in the description so that you can track the duration of Mirror Image during this fight so that you'll know when you'll regain all your threats, so that you can give the tanks a warning and a countdown that you're about to pull threat, and then they can right away taunt as soon as your Mirror Images fade. Before going into ranking specifics, as specs for this fight, a general rule is to not stand with people if you can manage it, as that will increase the chance an icicle will drop on you. Also note the icicle takes a few seconds before it drops, so you can finish a cast and then move back into your beam after 3 to 4 seconds have passed since the icicle formed. Or better yet, you could just, if you're already standing in a beam for that icicle, cast for a few seconds to get a few more out of that beam, then move out, do one cast, and then move back in. If you can manage that, if you can time it right. Also tell people to not stack on the NPCs, as icicles that drop on NPCs while they're casting a buff interrupts them, and then they won't cast the buff, which really sucks. Also, don't stand directly on campfires, or the icicles that drop on them can put them out. And lastly, it's obvious, but if you can find that magic beam that is next to a campfire that no one or very few people are on, that is how you will rank on this fight. First, for ranking as Fire, you want to precast a Frost Ward before the fight starts and be positioned right up next to the frozen targets. Then precast a Pyroblast on a frozen target with your pull timer, then Sapper and Blast Wave. Then focus DPS on Hodir, and be sure to move during your Hot Streak procs and Refreshing Oblivion Bomb in order to drop the Biting Cold stacks. Get next to a campfire as soon as one drops to stack up Singed, and as soon as it reaches close to 25 stacks, then move to a Moonbeam with Instant Cast and DPS there until Storm Cloud buff goes out. Watch for who gets the Storm Cloud, and then use Instant Cast to move closer to that person as soon as they get it, so that you can then get the Storm Power buff right away. Don't just expect them to come to you, because that won't always happen, and you are the best class for this fight, so you need to make sure you get the buff. Once the person gets the Storm Cloud debuff and they move to the range stack, use the Instant Cast, move to stack onto them like I said, and as soon as you get the buff, then I recommend popping Mirror Images and rocket booting to a remote Moonbeam away from everyone that is also hopefully next to a campfire. Heroism and Lust should go out at this point, and you want to pop all CDs and Potion of Wild Magic instead of Potion of Speed, and spam FFB. On Hodir during CDs, and while you have the Storm Power buff, you no longer have a rotation, and you simply spam Frostfire Bolt because of how much it benefits from Storm Power, and thus that's just more DPS than weaving in Hot Streak procs. If you have to move from icicles or to get on top of a frost mount, then you can use your Hot Streak procs, but you only Living Bomb if you don't have Hot Streak procs up, and thus that's the only instant cast you have, and you have to move. Ideally, you spam FFB during your CDs while you have Storm Power, and if you're Troll Race, then be sure to spread out your haste CDs to not waste any haste. If your FFB cast is 1.3 seconds or lower while you have Storm Power buff, then it seems to be more DPS to spam FFB than to use your Hot Streak procs. However, if that info changes, I'll update it in the pinned comment, so check that, because that might be a little off, but it seems to be about that much. When your Mirror Images are about to fade, give the tanks a warning so they can be ready for taunt. After they taunt, call for a Hand of Salvation to help reduce your threat, and as long as you don't go into melee range, you should be okay on threat at this point, because they should have, something like 1.8 million threat, and so then the ranged pull thing is 130% of that, right? So you have a bunch of threat to go to be able to pull off the tank. Just as long as you don't go into melee range, and assuming your tanks are doing the fight right. After a flash freeze for ranking, just focus Hodir, as your Boomkins and Locke should be able to break out the NPCs very easily, but if you're progressing, then help break out the NPCs, and if they're clumped up, then Blizzard and a Moonbeam can do a lot of damage to quickly break them out. And lastly, watch for subsequent Storm Clouds going out so that you can keep getting Storm Power buff, keep that rolling, and then just repeat the blasting like I said before. For ranking as Arcane, you definitely want to be in Canner's Absorption spec here. Precast a Frost Ward before the fight starts, and pre-position next to the frozen targets. Precast an Arcane Blast and single target the targets down, but also weave in a Sapper for some AoE damage on them. If you need to move during the fight, then cast Frost Ward, as the in-Canner's Absorption proc will give you some extra damage, and hopefully you get mana from Frost Warding procs too. If Frost Ward is on CD and you have to move, then Palm, but ideally you shouldn't have to move too much. Same as Fire spec ranking, you should move to a fire as soon as it goes out, and for Arcane, use Engineering Gloves once there to help stack Singed faster, because once Heroism goes out, you won't need that Engineering Gloves haste, you'll already be haste capped. Again, same as Fire, once Singed is close to 25 stacks, move to a beam and blast until Storm Cloud goes out. Then get Storm Power and use Rocket Boots with Frost Ward and Mirror Images as your instant cast to move to a beam far away from the crowd, and ideally near a fire too. Once Heroism or Lust goes out, use Arcane Power and Potion of Wild Magic. don't use Icy Veins as it's not needed, as Lust with the Moonbeam should put you at 1 second cast. And ideally you have an Innervate or 2 on this fight so that you can blast Arcane Blast during your Arcane Power window. Otherwise just do 4x rotation and blast. Once Heroism runs out, then wait to use your Icy Veins until you get another Storm Power buff, and then also use Gloves once off cooldown as well, and just get the Storm Powers and blast. Lastly, I should mention that there is a meme spec for Hodir, as you can see it here. It basically allows you to still provide the 3% damage buff to your raid, but picks up enough Frost and Fire talents to make Frost Firebolt the spell you use once you get the Storm Power buff, and only once you have the Storm Power buff. And then you can also have Arcane Power while spamming FFP, so it's quite the meme spec. I haven't used it, but credits to Taiwan for this disgusting monstrosity of a spec. I think it's stupid, but stupid as in, it's just, I hate that it's a thing. It can do well, and as the phase progresses, this may be the best Arcane spec for ranking on Hodir, but currently it doesn't have the top ranking, and it takes up a slot, spec slot as a meme spec, so that's you're using a spec slot for just one fight. But it's up to you. Check the video description for a link to the talents and the glyphs if you want to try it out or something. I'll update the pinned comment if it does become like the thing you have to do for Arcane ranking, but at this moment that is not the case. For Thorim, I recommend Arcane Incanter's Absorption spec if you're progressing on the fight, and that's assuming you can play Incanter's Absorption spec properly and that you can follow what I say here. So if you're still having trouble doing good DPS as Arcane on this fight, then Fire can do good DPS here as well, and then I recommend going Fire if you're struggling with Arcane at all. I just think Arcane Incanter's Absorption will be more consistent in its DPS if you're able to play it right, and it also helps out healers by Frost Warding on CD, so that's going to help them out. If your healers are really struggling with this fight, then you can also pick up Magic Absorption in your IA spec to help reduce the damage you take even further. And you could also do that as Fire Torment the Weak if you're Fire Torment the Weak spec. The Gauntlet is a joke and doesn't count towards ranking, so just conserve mana during it, DPS shit, and kick heals. First, for ranking, you should know that to get a top ranking, you'll need a priest mind controlling one of the Dark Rune Warbringers from Phase 1 and keeping them MC'd throughout Phase 2 to provide the Aura of Celerity buff to the raid, which is a huge DPS boost. I've had mixed signals from Warcraft logs on whether they're blacklisting this or not. Like they did say that they were going to a week or two ago, but at the same time, there's been no update. It still hasn't been blacklisted. I don't know. So if it gets blacklisted, check the pinned comment. I'll mention whether it is or not. As of right now, there's a bunch of logs that have it, that top logs, and they haven't been blacklisted. So I'm going to recommend doing it until they say to not to, I guess. So that's just a heads up on that. You know, could get blacklisted. I don't know. We'll see. For ranking as Arcane, time your DPS in the Gauntlet so that your trinkets come off CD before Phase 2 starts, and conserve mana to start Phase 2 with full mana. As you're running past Thorim, cast Frost Ward, and then blink down into your position, and once Lust or Heroism goes out, pop your cooldowns and Potion once your trinkets proc. And from here it's a tank and spank, with the exception that you want to keep Frost Ward up as much as possible, but you also want to cast it outside of your cooldowns and trinket procs, and if you have to move from Lightning, then that's also an ideal time to cast Frost Ward, of course, because it's an instant cast and you're moving. Watch your range meter, of course, and stick to your position, and if you have Innervates, then the Vates plus Frost Warding procs means you can spam AB for a lot of this fight since it's so short. If you are really going for rankings and also really trust your healers, then you can stand in Blizzard with your Frost Ward to hope for good Incanter's Absorption and rolling Frost Warding procs, and you can also Ice Block the area lightning that goes out, and for timing of that, you know that Thorim casts the lightning about 8 seconds after you see the lightning tendril on screen, so that's about how long you have to until you need to ice block. And if you do this, be sure to use a missile barrage before you block, otherwise you'll block off the Arcane Blast debuff stacks that you've accumulated, and this is wasted ramp as Arcane and thus wasted potential DPS, so just keep that in mind. Lastly, if you have to move for the lightning, then be sure to use instant cast and rocket boots while you move, of course, and if those are on CD, then you should blink. For Freya ranking, there isn't much to say. It's a tank and spank and use cooldowns appropriately for your kill time and for however your raid does Heroism and Lust, and then use Hot Streak procs and Living Bomb refresh with rocket boots to DPS on the move if you have to move for the lightning, so that way you just have no downtime, and just pray for crits. For Freya progression, I definitely recommend Fire if you don't need to provide the raid with the Arcane's 3% damage buff, as Fire can multi-dot the adds, and it has a knockback for the Detonator Lashers with Blast Wave. You just have to make sure to remove your Blast Wave glyph before the fight starts. And during progression, you'll want to heavily focus on trees and roots to the point where you'll blink across the room to DPS them down, depending on how aware your raid is. And Once your raid has the fight down, though, then you can mainly just DPS the ones in range of you, unless the tree isn't in range of anyone. Be cognizant of that, in which case you got to get there, blink to it, and DPS it down. For progression, you don't need to have Firestarter as fire, but I do recommend it for ranking. And the reason I don't think Firestarter is necessary for progression is because you'll typically always have enough DPS for the detonator lashers without it. And for progression, living bomb spam on the lashers is important so that you can maximize the number of explosions that go off after they're knocked back, because that's the critical time when you want them to all die. And because then also they knock back, they get stunned with Shadow Fury, and those living bomb explosions going off really help seal the deal. And then at that point, you're going to switch to Blizzard from a distance while they're stunned to finish them off, as well as use hot streak procs on the few high health remaining ones. And if they charge in, stop DPS, let the healers top off the raid before finishing them off one by one if you guys aren't able to finish them off while they're knocked back. Other progression tips are that you can ice block off the Nature's Fury debuff from the Conservator. Be ready with Hellstones or Ice Block if you're low HP and a ground tremor is about to happen, which would kill you. So a lot of times that'll happen. People aren't topped off. You might not be topped off for a ground tremor, so you can Ice Block to save yourself there. And you should also Fire Ward when the Detonator Lasher spawn, as their explosion is fire damage, so that way if you get hit by one or two of those, your Fire Ward will help keep you alive. You can target your own roots, and you can also blink while in roots, but it doesn't remove the root, so you still need to kill that root, but blinking away while in the root is helpful if you're in a bad position and need to move. You can't block off a root. For ranking as fire, pre-pop a flame cap, since pre-pots don't get much value with her RP. Freya damage doesn't count for ranking until phase 2, but put Living Bomb on her between ad phases, as the explosion can still hit your targets for damage and give you hot streak procs. As long as it won't proc your trinkets, and thus waste your trinket, or your 2-piece and waste them, then you should be putting Living Bomb on her. You can also use Scorch to fish for hot streak procs in between phases, again, only if it's not going to proc your trinkets or your 2-piece. I would also recommend Living Bomb on Freya as a movement GCD, and also to put Living Bomb on her during the 3-ad phase, assuming she'll be tanked near them so that they get hit by the explosion. For Detonator Lashers, cast 4 Living Bombs or so as they're grouped up. It depends on your raid, but about 4 seems right. And then Dragon's Breath and Flame Strike until the raid leader calls for your knockback. Then Blast Wave, use your Firestarter, instant cast Flame Strike as you move away, and then Blizzard down the ads. As your Living Bombs explode and you get your hot streak procs, use those, and stop casting Blizzard to use those. And for the 3-ad phase, Living Bomb them all, and also Living Bomb Freya, assuming she's going to be tanked near them, and then do a full Firestarter combo on them. Single target the Snap Lasher, as it's typically the high health one, until your Living Bombs explosions happen. You get hot streak procs, then spam the pyros. And it's unlikely that they'll survive another round of Living Bombs, so single target the high health one down, whichever one that is. Use your CDs for Conservator with the Mushroom buff for extra DPS, and Ice Block off the Nature's Fury debuff if you get it, so that you can just keep DPSing, of course. And then the main thing to remember is that it's kind of a crapshoot which order you get the ads in, so adjust your cooldowns to how long your raid's kill times are, but in general, I recommend saving Combustion for Conservator Mushroom buff, and otherwise, it's just, again, it's a crapshoot, so use your cooldowns with the ad order that you get. You can save your second set of uses, like Icy Veins for the second Conservator phase, because that's usually when people Heroism, and it'll be with the Mushroom, but I wouldn't recommend saving it until that first Conservator, just because that may not work out. So use your CDs on the first wave. For Arcane, again, the ad order is a crapshoot, so use your CDs at the start and then use subsequent uses based on your raid's kill time and heroism usage. However, as Arcane, you should pray for the Detonator Lashers at the start so that you can pop CDs for big AoE damage, and I also highly recommend Ice Shards talent for the extra Blizzard damage. So for Detonator Lashers, precast Flame Strike rank 9 and 8 as they group up, and then pop CDs, Sapper or Nade, and then Blizzard them down, and keep recasting Blizzard on them as they're knocked away. And you can also cast Palm Blizzard for a full Arcane Potency Blizzard, and then finish with an instant cast Flame Strike if your Arcane Power is on CD. The Mushroom buff during Conservator...
What's taters, precious?
Mushroom buff during Conservator is, of course, another great place to use CDs, and same with Heroism, which is typically during a Conservator phase, so that's a great time to stack all your CDs. Evocate in between phases if you need to, but watch boss timers to make sure you don't Evo right before a ground timer will be cast, or you're going to screw your Evocate. For ranking as fire, pre-pop a flame cap, since pre-pots don't get much value with her RP. Freya damage doesn't count for ranking until phase 2, but put Living Bomb on her between ad phases, as the explosion can still hit your targets for damage and give you hot streak procs. As long as it won't proc your trinkets, and thus waste your trinket, or your 2-piece and waste them, then you should be putting Living Bomb on her. You can also use Scorch to fish for hot streak procs in between phases, again, only if it's not going to proc your trinkets or your 2-piece. I would also recommend Living Bomb on Freya as a movement GCD, and also to put Living Bomb on her during the 3-ad phase, assuming she'll be tanked near them so that they get hit by the explosion. For Detonator Lashers, cast 4 Living Bombs or so as they're grouped up. It depends on your raid, but about 4 seems right. And then Dragon's Breath and Flame Strike until the raid leader calls for your knockback. Then Blast Wave, use your Fire Starter, instant cast Flame Strike as you move away, and then Blizzard down the ads. As your Living Bombs explode and you get your Hot Streak procs, use those, and stop casting Blizzard to use those. And for the 3-ad phase, Living Bomb them all, and also Living Bomb Freya, assuming she's going to be tanked near them, and then do a full Fire Starter combo on them. Single target the Snap Lasher, as it's typically the high health one, until your Living Bombs explosions happen. You get Hot Streak procs, then spam the Pyros. And it's unlikely that they'll survive another round of Living Bombs, so single target the high health one down, whichever one that is. Use your CDs for Conservator with the Mushroom buff for extra DPS, and Ice Block off the Nature's Fury debuff if you get it, so that you can just keep DPSing, of course. And then the main thing to remember is that it's kind of a crapshoot which order you get the ads in, so adjust your cooldowns to how long your raid's kill times are, but in general, I recommend saving Combustion for Conservator Mushroom buff, and otherwise, it's just, again, it's a crapshoot, so use your cooldowns with the ad order that you get. You can save your second set of uses, like Icy Veins for the second Conservator phase, because that's usually when people Heroism, and it'll be with the Mushroom, but I wouldn't recommend saving it until that first Conservator, just because that may not work out. So use your CDs on the first wave. If you're progressing on Firefighter, then go Fire if you don't need to provide the 3% damage buff, as it has the advantage of excellent DPS mobility and multi-dotting and cleave in phase 3 and 4. And for Spec, during progression, I also highly recommend Magic Absorption talent to help your healers out, as it cuts down on a lot of damage taken. Some other general progression tips are to Fire Ward on CD in phase 2 and 4 to help out healers, as the Heat Wave does a lot of damage, and the Rapid Burst and Hand Pulse are also fire damage. Be ready to Ice Block or Hellstone in phase 2 if you get low, and in general, be ready to do that, as this is a healing intensive fight. Focus on raid awareness more than doing max DPS during your progression. Don't die to stupid shit like mines or spinning up or the rocket launch or anything like that. We don't have any excuse as mages, since we have great mobility to avoid these mechanics, so just be very raid aware. You can blink through the spinning up if you time it just right, and depending on how far away you are from the boss, but it's better to not risk it, and only blink through it if you have no other choice. Also on the spinning up, notice that he kind of twitches around before casting it, and then he starts spinning clockwise, but sometimes he'll twitch to his left before starting the spin up, so be a little extra to the right of where he's facing just to be safe and prevent that from happening. I also recommend having the fire tracking weak aura that's linked in my video description, and you can see here, so that you can track when fire is about to go out. And you can also use the Sola targeting frames weak aura, which gives clickable target frames in phase 4 of the encounter, which can be helpful if you're having trouble clicking those nameplates during phase 4 and their bosses being moved around and everything. Take advantage of the long RP between phases to evocate as needed, and also reconjure a mana gem at some point, so you can get 4 uses because the fight's that long. And also get fresh Hellstones during in between the phases. Avoid standing near firebots, as they silence players nearby, and that's pretty much it for progression tips, but the main thing is just be raid aware, don't die. Alright, before spec specific ranking tips, some general DPS tips which apply to both specs are that you can get a full pre-pot on this fight, but you have to avoid the fire at the start. If the fire touches you, then you're immediately put into combat, so just be ready to blink when the fire goes out, and then you can hit your pre-pot right after Mimiron hops inside of his vehicle, with combat starting about a second after that. If you're having trouble getting the pre-pot off and your fire, then you can use a flame cap right before the fire goes out instead. And let's see some other tips. All damage counts towards your ranking for this fight, and no ad is removed, so keep that in mind. Everything counts. And also you can precast Flame Strike rank 9 and 8 before the boss activates in phase 2 and phase 4 for a little extra floor dot DPS. For ranking as fire for cooldown management, use your cooldowns as soon as you can in phase 1 and 2, and then use combustion once the head comes down in phase 3. If you're FFB, only use Icy Veins in phase 3 if your guild has a longer kill time, such as 8+ minutes. Otherwise, save Icy Veins until your other cooldowns are back up in phase 4. Don't use it in phase 3 if you get that shorter kill time. and wait until the boss is less than 35% HP for that execute damage as well, and then use your potion during this as well. Try and also wait until after your tank does a large move to use cooldown so you can plant your feet and blast. And then going back to phase 3, multi-dot the assault bots and junk bots with Living Bomb, and if they're ever grouped up and you're in melee range, hit them with a Firestarter combo and Sapper or Nade for some extra DPS. Focus the head when it comes down in phase 3, and hopefully Living Bomb explosions proc Hot Streak proc for you during this while the head is down, so you can just spam Pyroblast into it. And then phase 3 is also a good time for Mirror Image, so that you know, just for as a movement CD and also to not be getting hit by the head. During transition, kill everything you can as that DPS still counts, and then precast Flame Strike rank 9 and 8 on the boss before he spawns. And then in phase 4, prioritize Living Bomb on all 3 targets. Spam Hot Streak procs as the Living Bomb explosions will give you Hot Streak procs, and use Fire's mobility to stay in DPS range of the boss despite the constant movement. Also weave in a Sapper if you get in range, or you could also grenade, but I don't think Firestarter will be worth it since the Flame Strike won't hit the head. So don't worry about getting in range for Firestarter. Also, head always goes down first. It always seems to die first. So call DPS off it early, maybe at even like 20%, so that you guys can still multi-dot it while DPSing the other body parts. And that way you can have your high uptime on multi-dotting. For Arcane, cooldown management is similar in that you should use your CDs as soon as you can in phase 1 and 2, and then use Arcane Power once the head comes down in phase 3, and only use Icy Veins in phase 3 if your guild has a longer kill time such as 8+ minutes. Otherwise, save Icy Veins until your other cooldowns are back up in phase 4, and don't use it in phase 3 if your guild has a faster kill time. For Potion, use it with your Heroism wherever your guild uses that, likely either phase 2 or phase 4. And as Arcane, you definitely want to be IA Spec, and know that Mimiron's Heat Wave, Rapid Burst, and Hand Pulse are all fire damage, so use your Fire Ward off cooldown during phase 2 and 4 for good Encounters Absorption procs, and hopefully also good Frost Warding procs. Of course, try and cast Fire Ward outside of your damage CDs, and ideally during any movement you need to perform, and also in between phases. And the Fire Patches can of course be used to proc Encounters Absorption as well. You could utilize them in phase 1 and 3 for IA procs, but the movement in and out of the patch is likely a DPS loss, unless you have instant casts up like Palm to use while moving through it, or if Blink is down and you have to move through the Fire Patch anyways, then of course, you know, cast the Fire Ward and run through it to get to where you need to go. But overall though, I would just focus on Fire Ward in phase 2 and 4 like I said. For ranking as Arcane, that's largely it for tips, and it's mainly about being smart with movement and positioning to have high uptime on the boss. Arcane is amazing for progression on Vezax and can carry DPS hard while your raid is still learning the fight, as it's so mana efficient and also has the 40% reduced threat talent, so it's just great for it. When having to carry on this fight, I recommend using Missile Barrage as soon as it procs every time, as it's free DPS, and Tier 8 4-piece is also very amazing for Arcane on this fight. It's the one time we can actually make use of Tier 8 4-piece as Arcane. Mainly for progression you'll want to use it as well. It's just more mana free DPS. This fight is all about being as mana efficient as possible while you're progressing on it, and so when that's happening, I recommend only going up to 4 or 3 AB stacks. And if you didn't get a Missile Barrage proc during those, stacking it up to 3, then let the stacks drop and then cast Arcane Blast, do another 3 stacks, hoping for Missile Barrage procs. As your guild gets better during progression, then you can go up to 4 stacks. But if your guild is really struggling, then of course, you know, make your mana be as mana efficient as possible in terms of DPS, to be able to carry the rest of your raid who's gonna die or waste their mana in stupid ways or something like that. But basically, while you're progressing, don't ever spam at 4 AB stacks during progression, because you probably need to make better use of your mana for during progression. Some other general tips are that haste has little value on this fight due to the pool buffs, so swap off haste gear you have on for SP and crit gear if you have that option, and also use wild magic potion instead of potion of speed. And another tip is that you can use dark runes and demonic runes to restore mana on this fight, but know that if you do this, you should use Dark Rune first, as Dark Rune puts Demonic Rune and Hellstones on 2-minute CDs, but Demonic Rune puts Dark Rune and Hellstones on 15-minute CDs. So you basically, if you use Demonic Rune, you're fucked out of a Hellstone. So during progression, I actually don't recommend using Demonic Runes so that you can Hellstone in the Animus phase to help healers out while they learn, because that's a lot of damage for them. So just during progression, maybe just use Dark Runes. Also, you can Ice Block off the Mark of the Faceless, but save your Ice Block for if you get the Mark during the Animus phase, and just Blink out with Mark if you get it in phase 1. Also, if you're using DBM, then I recommend turning off this setting, which is on by default and is annoying as fuck because it tells you to move when someone near you has Mark, which is stupid, and no strat does that, and instead every strat has the marked person just run out of the stack. So yeah, definitely if you're using DBM, turn that off. And lastly, watch your threat. Don't pull aggro or you'll likely cause a wipe. Call for a hand to salve if needed, or use invis. During progression, I would simply watch threat in phase 1, call for a hand to salve if needed, and then in phase 2, I would wait until the tank has the animus, do some DPS, then pop mirror images, and then you can go ham for 30 seconds until there's about, you know, maybe 5 seconds left on the mirror images. Then you invis to drop all the threat, and then you should be fine from there. You can just pump without having to worry. Don't pop mirror images off the bat in phase 2, or they can do some weird shit like I had happen where they pulled aggro on the boss and then no one could peel the images. Some kind of weird spaghetti code bug shit. So wait until you've actually done a little bit of damage to the boss, to the animus, before you pop mirror images. Oh, and finally, actually, I should mention also there is the trinket Spark of Hope that you can see here that reduces your base mana cost of all spells. It drops from 10-man Kologarn. That can definitely help you out with progression and squeezing more DPS out of your mana. I don't think you'd actually use it for ranking, because for ranking it's not about, you know, squeezing the DPS out of your mana. It's more just doing as much damage as you can. But it's still just a nice trinket that you can pick up and have some fun with on Vezax and help you out with progression if you need to. And then there's also the Vanquished Clutches of Yogg Saran trinket that drops from Yogg 0 10-man. And this trinket, it's got a 154 static crit on it, and that's what you basically be using for on this fight, which, I don't know, the top Vezax log at the moment currently has this as one of their trinkets. Is it actually better than other trinkets? I'm not exactly sure, just that those raw 154 stats, I guess that could be pretty good for a fire, at least for the top fire ranking. So, not actually sure if it actually is better, but just something to keep in mind. So if you could pick this up doing Yogg 0 10-man, then you could use this for a good stats trinket on Vezax. So in general, for ranking on this fight, once your raid has this fight down, this fight is all about who can do the most damage to Vezax before he gets down to 5%, because you have to stop DPS until the animus spawns, and the damage stops counting for your ranking once he reaches 5% HP until the animus spawns, and then the damage will start counting towards your ranking again. You then, of course, so basically you want to go ham on the animus once it spawns, and for the animus, you would pop mirror images, and it should die in 30 seconds if your raid has their shit together during this fight. In general, ranking on this fight will be a fucking clown fiesta, and I'm not looking forward to it because it will simply be all about who can steal as much of the damage in phase 1, and of course there's also the mark of faceless RNG. That's, you know, how many marks you're going to get. I should note that for both Arcane and Fire ranking, you don't need to use your most mana efficient rotation as possible. You just going for DPS because you're trying to rank on this fight. So raid DPS is usually so high once the raid has the fight down that as Arcane you can do a 4x rotation and be fine on mana. And from fire logs, I'm still seeing Living Bomb and Hot Tree procs used during movement. So the fight is basically a threat management tank and spank that will turn into making deals with other ranged DPS to let them rank on Vezax this week, and then the other ranged get to do it next week, and it's just going to be stupid. I can just tell already. To the point where it should just be moved from All Stars, in my opinion, but that's just me because it's just going to devolve to degen shit like that, making deals with other range so that half the range can rank 1 week. And yeah, there's also degen shit you can do, like get a divine intervention and then you cancel the DI with a macro you have, and a couple GCDs after you cancel off the divine intervention, you won't have the mana reduction buff, so you can get mana pot in, and also you can evocate and get a tick or two of the evocate from after you're canceling off the divine intervention. And you can do this also while waiting for the animus, so it's not even going to reduce your DPS time. So overall, yeah, that's what ranking will be on this fight. It's dumb. Good luck. And lastly, there's an Arcane spec solely for Vezax. If you really want to min-max the fight during progression or for ranking, you can find a link to it in the video description. It's definitely kind of a meme, but it's less of a meme than the Hodir Arcane spec that uses FFP, because this one is just min-maxing Arcane talents for Vezax and the way that fight is. And so I do recommend it if you really want to min-max during progression. Not really needed for ranking, but you could if you really wanted to. But yeah, it's mainly only just going to be used for Vezax, of course. Fire is best for Yogg due to its ability to multi-dot tentacles in phase 2 and multi-dot in phase 3 while still looking away from the boss, but Arcane can do well here too during progression if you need to provide the 3% damage buff. During progression, DPS in phase 1 doesn't matter, so focus on not popping clouds, help with interrupts if there's multiple adds up, and save cooldowns for if someone accidentally pops a cloud or you fall behind due to distant ad spawns, or you just simply fall behind because of low rate DPS or something. In phase 2, use cooldowns at the start and prioritize Constrictors, then Crusher, then Corruptor in that order, and you want to position yourself with the raid, but also in a way that lets you multi-dot the Crusher Tentacle and the Corruptor Tentacles, assuming you're fire, as that's going to be max DPS rotation. You can also interrupt the Corruptor's cast, which helps out Dispellers since our Counterspell is off the GCD, and make sure to prioritize decursing targets as well, especially the melee that are going to be going down into the brain so that they don't have that curse go off while they're down in the brain and take damage they don't need to be taking. Also, do not Ice Block off Malady, as it just causes it to instantly jump, so don't do that. You can Ice Block off Constrictor Tentacle, but save that for when DPS is behind and they can't easily break out your Constrictor. Use downtime between phases in Phase 2, the Tentacle phases, or the transition to Phase 3 to Reconjure Gem and Evocate, and only use 2 and 3 minute CDs second time in Phase 2 if you need to in order to catch up Tentacles. Otherwise, save those for Phase 3. In Phase 3, if you're doing Yogg 1 light, then Living Bomb the adds as they come in and single target DPS Yogg. If you have extra sanity, then you can DPS Yogg until he does a Lunatic Gaze, and then instant 180 your camera and cast Living Bombs on targets that need it, and if all targets have Living Bomb, then just cast 2 Flame Strikes and go back to DPSing Yogg. I highly recommend the Yogg Lunatic Gaze Weak Aura linked in the video description so you can track when it's safe to DPS the boss in case you're low on sanity. If you're doing Yogg 0 progression, then you want to hard focus single target Yogg 0, but you can still Living Bomb Mortal Guardians that have HP, as the cleave is helpful, and as long as you use the Hot Streak procs that the Living Bomb explosions generate. Then it's a good single target DPS strat too, but you do have to use those Hot Streak procs for that to be worth it. So if you have sanity to spare, then you should even do quick 180s during Lunatic Gaze to keep sending the Hot Streak procs as the Living Bombs are exploding. And if your guild is doing a 2-tank strat for Yogg 0 with rolling external CDs on the tanks, which they likely are probably doing that strat, then single target damage is what matters here, and you shouldn't focus on AoEing the adds other than your just the Living Bombs like we talked about. Save Mirror Image for when your Living Bomb explosions put you high on threat with the adds, and then this high threat on the adds can actually be helpful because your tanks will likely kite the adds away at some point in the fight later on in Phase 3, and when they die, then all the adds are going to go to you because you have high threat on them. And this is good because then you can blink and rocket boots out to kite the adds some more, and when they get close to you, like just go all the way to the wall. When they get close to you, Ice Block, let them run back to the raid, then cancel off the Ice Block, and as they get close, Invis to drop the threat and ping pong them back to the raid, buying your raid a lot of extra DPS with that ping ponging. And then you can go back to Yogg and DPS some more, to help try and finish off Yogg while they're going around killing everyone. Congrats if you get it. Yogg 0 is a pain, but a lot of fun and a great accomplishment for any guild, so good luck. I hope you guys get it. Also, for Arcane progression on this fight, a lot of the above is the same, except that you can't multi-dot in Phase 2, of course, so focus Constrictors and then Crushers in that order. And for Phase 3, you basically just focus the boss. The main thing here for Arcane DPS is to not let your Arcane debuff stacks simply fall off, as that's wasted ramp-up time and thus wasted DPS. So you'll want a Missile Barrage before a Gaze goes out, or finish your cast right when Gaze starts so that your Arcane Blast debuff won't drop while you're faced away, and so that way you can just turn back to the boss when Gaze ends and use a Missile Barrage. For damage when faced away from the boss, I would cast a Flame Strike rank 9 and then rank 8. For ranking as Arcane and Fire, you want to use cooldowns as they come off cooldown to maximize DPS, but for Phase 3, wait until your raid lusts or heroisms to use them, and hopefully in Phase 1 your raid pops a cloud at the start to speed things up, maybe even a couple clouds, and then that's a really good time to pop CDs, of course. As Fire, pre-pop a Flame Cap before running into the room, since you can't pre-pot this fight. And then the main thing for ranking is in Phase 3, that's what it really comes down to. And it's all about DPSing on the adds. So you need to, of course, ensure that the boss dies, and Yogg 0 is still a semi-difficult fight, even once you have it on farm, so everyone can't just pad on the adds. You still need to do the fight. As Fire, you would want to prioritize Living Bomb on the adds when they have the HP to make it worthwhile, and then send Hot Streak procs into Yogg as the Living Bombs explode. And then after the add heals go out, Living Bomb the adds that have been filled up in HP, and then Fire Starter combo them, and again Hot Streak procs into Yogg as the Living Bombs explode. Sapper after the second heal or before the adds are kited out for maximum damage with your Sapper. And for Arcane, you'll want to have Ice Shards talent for Phase 3, and in Phase 3 as Arcane, you want a single target blast with CDs during Heroism, Flame Strike rank 9 and 8 when faced away from the boss, and once the ad heals go out, focus on AoEing the ads with Flame Strike rank 9, rank 8, and then Blizzard, and also use Palm for a Palm Blizzard into an instant cast Flame Strike as well for extra DPS. So you're going to want to AoE the ads after a heal goes out, and other than that, but only during that time, and then single target Yogg. And again, all this is assuming your raid has the DPS to kill the boss, even with you doing some AoE as Arcane or some, extra AoE as Fire. If your raid does not, then don't risk not getting the kill for the ranking. But unfortunately, this is what it will take to rank as Fire and Arcane on Yogg 0. For progression on Algalon, you can be Fire or Arcane, but note that Arcane does take some more skill to play properly, as you'll want to be in Counter's Absorption spec, and you need to play that spec right on this fight. So if you're having trouble min-maxing Arcane with IA on this fight, then just go Fire. It'll be a lot easier for you, and Fire's great. Whichever you choose, I recommend having the Magic Absorption talent during progression, as it helps out healers and also surviving black hole explosions, especially with constellations Arcane barraging people. And so if an Arcane barrage hits you during a black hole explosion, that's a lot of damage. On that note, interrupt the constellations every chance you get, as our Counterspell locks them out of casting for 8 seconds, and there's a good Counterspell Mouseover macro in the video description that I highly recommend using. Other general progression tips are to play it safe and get to a black hole early during Big Bang. Frost Nova the constellations during Big Bangs before you go into a black hole, so that way they can't move, and otherwise they can move to a black hole and close it when people are trying to enter that, and it get people killed. And to further help healers out, move away from Cosmic Smashes while casting Fire Ward. Alright, on that note, I'm going to get into ranking tips for Arcane, but this is something to know for progression as Arcane as well, as it's integral to your DPS. You want to position yourself about 5 to 10 yards away from the Cosmic Smashes, so when Cosmic Smash starts, you cast a Fire Ward and position yourself about 5 to 10 yards away from the Cosmic Smash, roughly the distance you see me doing in this clip. And if you're too close, it's too much damage and will make healers' life hard, but if you're too far away, it only does like 500 damage, which is shit for an IA proc, and same with Frost Warding proc. So if you position yourself right, you'll get a good damage proc from Counter's Absorption, and if you're lucky, you'll then of course get the Frost Warding proc, and you get a good amount of mana too from it. If you're lucky throughout a fight, you can get over 20k mana from Frost Warding by the end of the fight. I've seen as high as 28k mana, so it's just an insane amount of mana if you get lucky with Frost Warding procs during this fight. Obviously, if the Cosmic Smashes are all far away from you, then don't bother. Like if they're on the other side of the room or 15 to 20 yards away or something like that, just keep DPSing the boss. Also, Cosmic Smashes happen every 24 seconds or so you can't Fire Ward every Cosmic Smash. Since not every Cosmic Smash is worth Fire Warding, I don't always cast Fire Ward. Some can be far, some of the Cosmic Smashes can just be too far away for it to be worth it, and so I wait to see where the Cosmic Smash is, and then I decide to cast Fire Ward or not. If you're lucky with Frost Warding proc, then that means you'll still have a full Fire mana shield up for the next Cosmic Smash if the next one is also near you, and so basically you Fire Ward, you get a Frost Warding proc, you still have your full Fire Ward for the next Cosmic Smash. So to track this, I recommend the Nan Shield Weak Aura linked in the video description as a way to track whether your Fire Ward shield got damaged, and also how much it got damaged, so that way you know how much is left for the next Cosmic Smash. Also, movement into a black hole during Big Bang is a great time to cast Fire Ward, as well as your mirror images, so make use of your instant cast during movement, and now you have Fire Ward during this fight as another instant cast during movement. For cooldowns on this fight, precast Fire Ward a few seconds before the boss is pulled, and then once combat starts, pop all CDs and Sapper, and once your trinkets proc, and then use CDs based on your kill time. But in general, with how long this fight is, use your cooldowns as they come off cooldown, and then only delay a use to stack them with trinket procs for their very final use in phase 2. And again, this is all based on your kill time. You're gonna have to figure that out. Only Evo if you need to, because you happen to get unlucky with Frost Warding procs. Otherwise, just keep hoping for good Frost Warding procs so you don't have to do Evo. And if you do have to Evo, try and do it while you're in the upside down, since you can't DPS during that time anyways. So go down for the Big Bang, and then just be sure to move away from the black hole locations before you start casting the Evo, so that you don't get sent right back down after the Big Bang goes out while you're still finishing your evocation. Another little tip on that, if you do get sent down, if you happen to accidentally get pulled down, touch a black hole or something like that while DPSing Algalon, you can ice block to send you back up from the upside down. You cannot ice block Big Bang, don't try it, you will die. So ideally you shouldn't have to do that, but if you do accidentally get pulled down, you can ice block to get out of there. Lastly, you can't pre-pot on the very first pull of this encounter due to the long RP, and even subsequent pulls will fuck up your pre-pot. out of at least 5 seconds of the pot, depending on when he puts you into combat. So I've started to not bother with pre-pot, and I just potion during the initial opener with all cooldowns during the heroism. I've seen top rankings do both ways, so either way it's close. For fire on Algalon, you can pre-pot with a flame cap, and then you can use your potion during the execute phase of the boss. The same cooldown rules as Arcane apply, in that you want to maximize cooldown uses by using them as they come off cooldown, and then just delay your final uses of cooldowns for the end of the fight to line up with execute range of the boss, trinket procs, other cooldowns, etc. For fire, be sure to take advantage of instant casts anytime you need to move for Cosmic Smashes or move for Big Bang. And in Phase 2, Living Bomb the first 3 or 4 adds that come out. The damage on them will count towards your ranking as long as they die, and the first 3 or 4 always seem to die to cleave. And the explosions that you put from putting Living Bomb on them will also generate Hot Streak procs for you to use, so it's still good single target DPS. Living Bomb, as many of them as you think will die in Phase 2. Alright, thanks everyone for watching. That's all I got. I hope it helps for both progression and for rankings. And I know in some of the clips I'm obviously not doing the strats that I say. Do as master says, not as master does. I definitely botched some of them. So, but I do think these are the strats to use. They might evolve over time, but I do think there's a strats to use. So even though I botched some of them or whatever, I think my rankings back up most of the strats. I know my Algalon ranking isn't the best, but on my alt, on Sith, he has the 5th Arcane ranking, so I think it is the strat to go, and you know his gear isn't as good as Krat's and whatnot. So you know, hope you can trust these rankings. I'll try and update the pinned comment if the strats evolve, or just there's other new strats that come out, or if I'm wrong on some things. So definitely check that. And then as always, like and subscribe. If you like the video, really helps it out. Drop the follow at twitch.tv/Kateria, and feel free to join the Discord to join in some mage discussion. Its link is in the description as well as right there, discord.gg/Kateria. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Enjoy the bonus clip. Cheers.
There's 2 fires on melee.
It already went off or something. Melee, we gotta go. I got sack up. There's mines there, melee.
Watch your step.
Frostbomb, boot. We gotta boot. We gotta boot back towards entrance. Fuck. Back
Oh
towards
god.
entrance.
Oh man.
This is bad. This is so fucking This is so fucking bad.
Yeah, we'll still
We got
get it.
8 seconds.
Stay input.
1 second.
Oh!
Oh!
No.
I taunted.
Keep KB up.
If I get hit, I'm just gonna die.
I need innervate.
Pain sub? Oh, it's ready.
Just kill the motherfucker, goddamn! No, you gotta kill the wall.
No.
Go
What? Whatever, man.
No.
What the fuck?
Keep running.
You got no
Keep
way.
running.
We're gonna
Deterrence, some deterrence.
I'm gonna try challenging.
Just don't spread the debuff. Don't spread the debuff.
running. I'm running. My penance was down.
Just keep trying. Casters just.
900.
frostbend.
Bendy.
Do you have an aggro drop set?
I already used it.
Come on.
Because you're ahead of me and I have
Run out.
nothing, so.
Watch for debuff.
I got it. No.
Come on, 200. Come on, KP.
I have no mana. It's just my pet.
I need a Shadow Crash.
There's one way out here.
Oh, Blaze has got one.
Evasion.
Just run. Come on. Come on.
Yeah! Let's go! Let's go! Normal mode Vezax down, baby!